Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
It's the budget day, the markets are booming, and I bet you've been listening to many experts of public finance and of the economy. So economists and public finance and taxation experts. I'm not one of those. My vantage point is political. So I talk about the political meaning of this budget. Let me also give you a health warning to begin with, that this is an opinionated edition of Cut the Clutter. In fact, I'm also doing a written equivalent of this as an occasional column I write called Factivist. So you can also access that on our website. I will also give you a link in the course of time with the description of this episode of Cut the Clutter. Now, what does this budget tell us politically? This budget tells us that this is the first clear shift in the direction of India's political economy in 3 decades. The reason we say 3 decades is that last was 1991, the Manmohan Singh Narasimha Rao budget, and that signal for reform. That was the first one. That did not last very long. Since then, all the budgets that Narendra Modi has put out now in the past 6 years since he came in, I would call them as Congress plus, from Congress plus to Congress plus to Congress plus and Congress plus budgets. In fact, I will also borrow the expression from my friend Arun Shourie to say Congress plus and cow, because you saw a lot of the change on what the BJP sees as the cultural side, but not on the economic side. On the economic side, there was continuity in the wrong direction. Now there is a shift in the right direction, and this direction is right not just ideologically, but also prudentially, because India needs growth at this moment. Now look at what's happened with our political economy all these decades. Now, first of all, you must remember, and we must keep this in mind, that in a democracy, everything rides on politics. So everything is rooted in politics. Nothing happens without politics. So from health to education to culture to national defense to foreign policy to the markets, in fact, even to the extent of who will be the head of India's Board of Cricket Control, BCCI, all that is determined by politics. So politics is essential to everything that happens in a democracy. So those times when you could do economic reform by stealth are now over. You can't do things on the side, because as we keep saying, that in that orchard now, low-hanging fruit has all been plucked. So reform now is a tough one, and tough one means you now have to embrace the idea that the only thing that will work is growth. Even if you have to distribute, for distribution, you have to first earn money. Because if you don't do that, then you have nothing to distribute. Then you do what is called as equal distribution of poverty. And that is something that I had defined in my sort of more angry moments as povertarianism, which is the essence of povertarianism is poverty is my birthright, and I shall make sure I will do everything in my power to ensure that you have it. Now, this is a shift from that direction, that povertarian direction, and that's why it's a political shift to the right. It's also a political economy shift the right way. It's also prudent. So ideologically right and prudentially right. Now, what has happened with us in the past? We've not had many great moments of a reformist surge. So 1991 budget was one, but that lost its steam in about 18 months, because then the Harshad Mehta scam came. I bet you've been watching the film on your OTT platforms. Harshad Mehta scam came, other issues came, and within the Congress party, there was a lot of resistance to that reform. The party wasn't ready to that reform, and Narasimha Rao wasn't strong enough in his party to push that or continue pushing that. And also, in his own mind, he had not yet embraced the idea so thoroughly. Then we saw one more sort of a kind of an episode when Deve Gowda's government came in. P. Chidambaram was finance minister. It was an unusual government. It was a United Front government that was not just supported by the left, but its first cabinet actually had 2 ministers from the left. That is Indrajit Gupta with Home and Chaturanand Mishra with agriculture. So key ministries were with the left. In spite of that, because once again there was a sense of crisis, and also Deve Gowda was quite hands-off with the running of details of this government, Chidambaram was able to bring out that budget. So whenever these odd things happen, we call them dream budgets, because these are so rare in the history of our political economy. Then there was a period in Vajpayee's second half. Vajpayee ruled for 6 years. So about the second half, 2 years of Yashwant Sinha and 1 year or so of Jaswant Singh, when they got into their reformist India shining phase. So you did not have anything in such quantums as the 1997, 98 or 91 dream budgets, but you did have some large-scale changes in reduction of tariffs, reductions of taxes. There were many rollbacks also, after which Yashwant Sinha was called rollback minister, but still net there was a lot of reform. Particularly, if you see that with the privatization push that Vajpayee government had given with Arun Shourie as the disinvestment minister. Remember, in the past, no government has ever used the expression privatization. It's the first time in this budget that Modi government, in the history of India's political economy, has talked about privatization. That is an unabashed admission of the fact that government should not be running businesses. So that is a big change, and that is not a change in detail, that is a change in some fundamental politics. And that is what we are taking a note of right now. So the second half of Vajpayee's tenure, which saw reform, it ended with that surprise defeat for his party and his coalition in 2004. Now, that when Congress came into power leading UPA, it was a very unlikely result at that point. So immediately the Congress party and the left intelligentsia and also the environment around Congress party, plus the many parties that came to support UPA, especially the left, they gave their own spin to why they had won and Vajpayee had lost. They said that the poor of India, the peasants of India, the tribals of India, they had rebelled against Vajpayee's neoliberal policies and rejected them and wholesale voted him out and voted the Congress in. The fact is, nobody checks the facts. The fact is that in that election, the difference between Congress and the BJP was just 8 seats. 8 seats. In fact, their seats were so low that even if you added both of them, you barely got a full majority. So it's not as if any decisive victory was scored. This was a very narrow points win. But the other thing that had happened was they said come in the wake of the 2002 Gujarat events and riots and killings, and too many of Vajpayee's coalition partners were not willing to go with him. That is one. And second, those that still decided to go with him lost their Muslim vote and they lost their seats. And that is what led to several of these regional parties winning. Anyway, we are not going into the history of that phase. We are just saying that political economy changed again because Vajpayee had given it one direction. In its second term, when the UPA came, they came up with this incredibly cynical and I would say ridiculous or ludicrous idea of inclusive growth. Because what do you mean by inclusive growth? That means you had growth so far that was not inclusive. And once again, you come to the same question that if you don't have growth, what do you distribute to include people? You need growth. You need people to become rich. Then you take taxes from them efficiently without corruption. And then you distribute that efficiently without leakages, etc. to the poor. That continued for about 10 years. For some time, UPA was able to ride the growth path that opened up after the Vajpayee era reforms. But in the course of time, it settled down. 2008, the global financial crisis came. By the time the second term of UPA came, there was a full-on war on growth. And once again, between NAC and Sonia Gandhi, this growth versus inequality binary had become top of the mind. And that is when UPA lost whatever little energy it had to push in the direction of reform. Towards the end, it tried something with allowing FDI in multi-brand retail, but it was too late by then. It had lost too much political capital. In fact, what we ended up, on the other hand, was rights-based laws, right to food, right to employment, right to education, and Frankly, if that government had continued a bit longer, Sonia Gandhi and the NAC might have also given us laws against a bad monsoon and laws against India losing any cricket series anywhere, cricket tournament anywhere. Because it's not just by passing laws that you can fix fundamental problems. Also, even for these rights-based laws to work, you need to have the money. Now, if you look at this budget, what is the best news about this budget? The best news is that there is no news on taxation. What that means is nothing new has been done to taxation. There are no changes in taxation. There's a little bit of sort of fixing there in the sense that you say that I will now take agricultural infra tax. So for the consumer, the price will not go up because I will reduce my excise and customs accordingly. What that means is, the reason I say that there is a little sleight of hand there, that this money will now come to Government of India. The Government of India does not have to share it with the states, and I'm sure there'll be pushback from the states, but that's a different issue. That's also an issue of political economy, but that's a different issue. And we'll come to this when the states have read this budget and come up with their responses. But the fact is, there is no change in taxation, which is quite unlike the last 6-7 years of Modi government. Modi government tried to make a good start because governments earlier, whether they were Narasimha Rao's or Vajpayee's or Manmohan Singh's, could have at least said that, look, I didn't have a majority. Voters of India have denied Narendra Modi that alibi twice in succession now. So he cannot say, I don't have a majority. So when he came to power the first time, he tried something with that new land acquisition law, but he lost nerve very quickly. It was passed in Lok Sabha, but then that Soot-Boot Ki Sarkar statement was made and he completely lost nerve and overcorrected after that in the wrong direction. That is why in the remaining 6 years, we had budgets which I just described to you as Congress plus, 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 plus. And you can keep adding those pluses because every budget tinkered with the tax rates. Every budget gave you some surprise. In fact, even in the course of the year, you continue to get surprises on economic policy. The biggest and the worst surprise of all and the most unwise surprise of all was obviously demonetization. With this budget, now you see there's a change in direction. One, because I think there is a realization that at this point, unless the economy changes direction, last 3 years the economy has been declining. This pandemic has made it much worse, but even before that, for 8 quarters, the economy was declining. This is not the way you can continue to win elections in India, no matter how much you throw in by way of nationalism, culture, religion, etc., because this is something that I've always said, that today when people have become aspirational, any growth rate, average growth rate of less than 7% in India will be socially destabilizing. People will get angry, and I suspect Modi government now sees it that they've been lazy on the economy for too long. They can't take the Indian voter for granted. And second, the pandemic itself has given an opportunity, and I'm glad that in the spirit of never waste a crisis, he's making a good use of the crisis. The second thing is, Modi government, I think, is quite notorious for saying one thing very honestly, which is that they don't consult economists and they don't take economists seriously. So maybe in this case, we can say that we should be grateful that they did not consult economists in this case, because there were too many bad ideas were floating in this virus-laden air. And those ideas were like, increase your tax rates, tax the rich more, rich have become richer, confiscate people's wealth. That was an idea that came from a bunch of economists and intellectuals, a little bit on the left of center side, included my friend Yogendra Yadav and many others. So I spoke about it, and then Yogendra also responded to what I had written or what I had said. But the fact is, bad ideas were floating in the air, or that the rich who have their wealth in the stock markets, they should be taxed on a presumptive basis on unrealized capital gains. All these would have been confiscatory steps. And if this had been done, you can imagine what the picture the day after this budget would have looked like. So Modi government is right in not looking at the economists in this case, because economists are not accountable on the day after. It's the politicians who are accountable the day after. And as we told you, economics in a democracy is all politics. So one good thing that Modi government has done, or at least tried to do, I hope they can sustain it, that they have ended that binary of growth versus inequality. It is a bogus debate. And why do I call it a bogus debate? I told you this Cut the Clutter is a bit commentative or opinionated. I call it a bogus debate because while we accept that growth causes inequality, what does lack of growth do? Does lack of growth cause inequality? No, it doesn't. Lack of growth makes the poor much poorer, but the rich do all right. Because if that wasn't the case, why would so many of the povertarians be flaunting Oxfam report now saying that the top 100 billionaires of India have actually added a lot more to their wealth even in this pandemic year? And that's a global Rona Dona right now, that the rich have become richer, the super rich have become richer in this pandemic year because they are the ones who've been protected from the impact of this pandemic. At the same time, the poor have become much worse. Literally hundreds of millions of people have lost their jobs. So once again, this turn in India's political economy tells us that Modi government, and I welcome it, Modi government is now putting its faith in growth. Even to increase its revenue and resources, it's not increasing tax rates. At least it's not increasing tax rates to impress its voters. Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, had a tax rate of 97.5%. So, okay, the poor could be very happy. वो गरीबी हटाओ, पर वो गरीबी नहीं हटा रही थी, वो अमीरी भी हटा रही थी. And that is what founded India's black market, because people took their capital outside of India. Who wants to pay 97.5% tax? So now this is a signal that Modi government is saying in growth we trust, and we count on growth now to even increase our revenues, which we can then distribute, maybe to improve the fate of the poor or to buy votes. You can describe it as you wish. So I will conclude this episode of Cut the Clutter with a quote from a bad guy, with a quote from Michael Douglas's Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, except I will tweak it a bit to suit myself. So I've written it, I will read it out for you. Some tweaks you can figure out because one word I have changed everywhere. One you may not figure out immediately, but I will tell you. So here we are. This is not Gordon Gekko. This is me talking right now. So these are not exactly Gordon Gekko's words. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that growth, for the lack of a better word, is good. Growth is right. Growth works. Growth clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Growth in all its forms, growth for life, for money, for love, or for knowledge, has marked the upward surge of humankind. So the one other word I changed besides greed for growth everywhere is mankind for humankind. So on that note, we conclude this opinionated episode of Cut the Clutter on the new union budget.